Hi, in this video, we're going to change the subject of a formula where we've got powers involved. Remember, to make x a subject of the formula means to get x on its own on one side of the equation. So this x will be on its own on one side of the equation and this x here as well. So let's think how we do the first one. If I just copy it out. We need to get x on its own. And the way we do that is to gradually undo the things around the x. Like it's almost like unpeeling an onion to get to the center. So let's think what's happening to x here. X is being squared, then it's being multiplied by a, and then you're adding b to it. Now, the last thing that was done there is adding b. So you want to undo it by subtracting b from both sides. Whatever you do to one side of the equation, you've got to do the same to the other. So we get c minus b on the left-hand side, and this minus b cancels out this plus b here, so we just get ax squared. Now, what's the next step? Well, x is being squared, and then it's being multiplied by a. Be really careful here. You might be tempted to square root both sides, get rid of that squared, but think about the order. Ax squared means a times by x squared. So the x is being squared, and then it's being times by the a. So you want to undo the last thing that's done there, which was the times by a. So we need to divide both sides of the equation by a. And when I do that, I'm going to do c minus b all over a. And on the right-hand side, the divide by a cancels out that a on the front of the x squared, giving just x squared. Now, finally, to get x on its own, x is being squared, you undo the squared by doing the opposite, which is square rooting. So you square root both sides, square root the right-hand side, square root the left-hand side. So we're going to square root all of that fraction. Make sure that square root goes over the whole fraction because we're square rooting the whole thing. And then the square root here cancels out the squared, just leaving x. And that is the final answer here. We could put the x on the left-hand side to say x equals root c minus b over a, which might be slightly nicer. What about the second one? This one's a smidge harder, but they're both hard. C is equal to b minus ax squared. We want to get the x on its own. Now, there's a little trick I use here. If the subject, x, is in a term that's being subtracted from something, then I use something called the Swapsy trick. So here's the Swapsy trick. It's a really nice trick. Suppose you had 10 minus 7 is equal to 3. How could you swap some of those numbers into subtraction so it's still true? Well, you could swap the 7 and the 3. So 10 minus 3 is equal to 7. That's still true, right? So it seems you can swap the thing that you're subtracting and the result of that subtraction. And you can do the same here. I can swap the thing that we're subtracting and the result of that subtraction. So if we do that, we swap those, we get ax squared is equal to b minus c. And now that's a much easier equation because x is not being subtracted from something. So let's continue in the same way. X is being squared and then it's being times by a. So we undo the last thing, we divide by a to get rid of the times by a. So we've now got just x squared on the left and b minus c over a on the right. And then finally, to get rid of that squared on the x, we square root both sides. So the left-hand side just becomes x. The square root cancels out the squared. And then we do the square root of that whole thing on the right-hand side. And that is the final answer.